I never thought I'd be the type of person to end up in a neighborhood feud. I always figured those stories about nightmare HOAs and power-hungry board members were just exaggerations. Turns out they're very real. And I learned that the hard way. I live in a quiet, suburban neighborhood. Pretty standard setup. Neatly trimmed lawns, kids riding bikes, the occasional over-enthusiastic dad washing his car like it's a prized sports car. The kind of place where people generally keep to themselves, but will nod at you when taking out the trash. Everything was fine, except for one little problem. Our neighborhood had an HOA, and not just any HOA, the kind that thinks it's running a military base instead of a community. And leading this little operation? Karen. Well, her name isn't actually Karen, but if you met her, you'd understand why I call her that. Karen was on the HOA board and took her job way too seriously. She wasn't just a rule enforcer. She was a full-time surveillance system in human form. I swear this woman knew what time people took their trash cans in, how long a car was parked on the street, and probably even what brand of mulch everyone used. She had this weird way of always bumping into people at just the right moment, like she had a sixth sense for neighborhood rule violations. Her car was spotless. Her porch decorations were always HOA approved to a scary degree, and she had a habit of tilting her head and smiling in a way that felt less friendly and more threatening. At first, I just found her annoying. She'd casually mention things like, "I noticed your grass is getting a little long, just a friendly reminder." Or, "Your porch light is a bit bright at night, might want to check HOA regulations on that." Stuff that wasn't a big deal, but also wasn't her business. I brushed it off, figuring she was just one of those people. But then the complaints started getting more specific. I was suddenly getting notices about the exact position of my trash can, the shade of paint on my fence, and even the way my car was parked in my own driveway. That's when I realized Karen wasn't just annoying. She was making me a target. At first, I tried to brush off Karen's nitpicking as her just being overly invested in her little HOA role. I figured if I just followed the rules, she'd leave me alone. But it didn't take long to realize that no matter what I did, it was never going to be enough. It started with small things. I got a notice in my mailbox about my lawn being too high, by half an inch. I had mowed it just a few days before, so I figured it had to be some kind of mistake. Nope. Karen happened to be outside when I checked my mail and gave me that too sweet smile. "Oh, don't worry. It's just a friendly reminder. We all have to do our part to keep the neighborhood looking nice." I gritted my teeth and mowed the lawn again, even though it looked exactly the same. Then it was my trash cans. Apparently, leaving them out for 30 minutes past the designated pickup time was a violation. I had gotten home late from work, and by the time I brought them in, Karen had already left me a note. "Not a big deal, just something to keep in mind. We all have to follow the rules, after all," she said the next day when I ran into her. I wanted to remind her that I had seen her trash cans still sitting out, but I bit my tongue. The most ridiculous one? My front porch decorations. I had a simple wreath on my door, nothing crazy, just a basic seasonal one. But apparently it clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic. Karen, of course, made sure to let me know in the most condescending way possible. "Oh, sweetie, I love your little wreath, but it's just a tiny bit outside the guidelines. You understand, right? It's not me, it's the rules, honey." I really tried to keep the peace. I adjusted things, followed the rules to the letter, and made sure I wasn't doing anything that could be considered a violation. But no matter what I did, the complaints kept coming. Meanwhile, I noticed that other neighbors weren't getting the same treatment. Their lawns were just as long as mine had been. Their trash cans sat out for hours. And their porch decorations? Way more over the top than my little wreath. But no notes, no complaints, no Karen lurking around with her fake smile and clipboard. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about the rules. It was about me. Karen had decided, for whatever reason, that I was her new project. And that's when things really started to get under my skin. It was one of those mornings where everything felt off. The sky was dark, rain was coming down in sheets, and I was already running late. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I stepped outside. Karen's car sitting right under my carport like it belonged there. At first I thought maybe she had broken down or something. Maybe she had some kind of emergency. But no, Karen was just casually sitting in the driver's seat, checking her phone like this was completely normal. I knocked on her window, and she rolled it down with that same fake, sugary smile. "Oh, morning, Marcus. I hope you don't mind. I just needed a dry spot to park. The street is so flooded, and I figured you wouldn't mind since you don't use this space much." I blinked at her. Yeah, I do use this space. You can't just park here without asking." She sighed like I was being difficult. "Well, it's just for a little while. Unless—" She trailed off and glanced toward my garage. "You know, if you just pulled your car out, I could park inside instead. That would really help me out." I almost laughed at how ridiculous she sounded. "You want me to move my car out of my own garage so you can park inside?" She nodded, completely serious. I mean, it would be the neighborly thing to do. I didn't even bother arguing. "Yeah, that's not happening. You need to move your car." And just like that, the fake sweetness disappeared. Her face twisted into an irritated scowl. "This is so unreasonable, Marcus. I'll be bringing this up with the HOA board." I didn't care. I just wanted her car gone. She finally sped off in a huff, splashing water everywhere like some kind of dramatic movie villain. I figured that was the end of it. Just another weird Karen moment to add to the list. But later that afternoon, I got an email from the HOA with the subject line, "Emergency Parking Provision Proposal." I opened it and immediately felt my blood pressure spike. It was a new rule proposal stating that, in times of severe weather, certain HOA members, gee, I wonder who that meant, could temporarily use covered driveways and garages of other homeowners to avoid potential vehicle damage. It didn't name me directly, but it was obvious who this was aimed at. Karen had wasted no time trying to turn this into an official rule. Luckily, I had a lawyer friend who lived a few streets over. I forwarded the email to him, and he responded almost immediately. "They can't enforce this. HOA doesn't have the power to take control of your private property. If they try, they'll have a lawsuit on their hands." That was all I needed to hear. I sent the HOA a polite but firm response, citing legal property rights and making it clear that any further attempts to enforce this nonsense would be met with legal action. I didn't get a response, but the proposal magically disappeared from the next HOA meeting agenda. Karen, however, wasn't done with me yet. This was just the beginning. I pulled into my driveway after a long day, expecting nothing more than a quiet evening. But as my headlights swept across my garage door, something felt off. The side door was slightly ajar. My gut told me something was wrong, but I brushed it off. Maybe I had forgotten to close it properly earlier. Then, as the garage door lifted, my brain short-circuited. Sitting inside, right where my car should have been, was Karen's spotless white SUV. For a second, I just stared, completely dumbfounded. Had I somehow left the garage open? Did I invite her in and suffer some kind of memory lapse? I stepped inside, looking around, and that's when I saw it. A handwritten note taped to my workbench. "Marcus, had an emergency board meeting and needed a secure place to park. Used your garage since you were out. Thanks, Karen." I stood there, reading it over and over, as if the words would change into something that made sense. Used your garage? Thanks? She wrote this like she had borrowed a cup of sugar, not broken into my house. Then it hit me. During a previous HOA inspection, Karen had been inside my garage when they did one of their ridiculous compliance checks. She must have memorized my keypad code, my hands clenched into fists. This wasn't some annoying HOA nonsense anymore. This was straight-up trespassing. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and changed the keypad code immediately. Then, for good measure, I locked the manual latch on the inside. Karen wasn't getting back in. Not even 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from Karen. "Marcus, I need my car now." I smirked. Oh, so now she needed something from me? I let her sweat for a few minutes before responding. "Oh, sorry. I had no idea you were using my garage as your personal parking spot. I locked it up and changed the code since someone apparently had access without permission. Guess you'll have to wait until I'm available to let you in." Instant reply. "You can't just lock me out like this. This is illegal." Illegal? The irony almost made me laugh. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, grabbed a drink, and let her panic for a while. If she wanted her car back, she was going to have to ask, and she wasn't going to like how long that took. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. Changing the keypad code was a good start, but I needed something stronger. Karen had already proven she had no boundaries, so I wasn't about to leave any chance for her to weasel her way back in. I grabbed a heavy-duty padlock from the hardware store and installed it inside the garage, locking the manual release latch. Now, even if she somehow figured out the new keypad code, she still wouldn't be able to open the door. Her car was staying put until I decided otherwise. Sure enough, that evening, as I was winding down, I heard the telltale beeping of my garage keypad being pressed. Then again, and again. The faint sound of a fist smacking against metal followed. I smirked. "Oh, realizing you're stuck, are we?" Then came the doorbell. I took my time answering, letting her stew on the porch for a bit. When I finally opened the door, there she was, hands on her hips, face redder than I'd ever seen. "You locked my car in your garage," she shrieked. "That's theft." I leaned against the doorframe, completely unbothered. "No, you parked in my garage, again, without asking." I assumed. I held up a hand. "And that's the problem, Karen. You keep assuming." She opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly trying to come up with some excuse that would justify her actions. But she had nothing. Finally, she went for the classic HOA power move. "If you don't open that garage right now, I'll call the police." I folded my arms. "Go ahead." Then I pointed at the security camera mounted right above my door. "I've got footage of you trespassing, so if the cops show up, we can have a real conversation about who's breaking the law here." Her face paled for just a second before she caught herself. Then, with a dramatic huff, she turned on her heel and stormed off. I watched her go, shaking my head. If she thought she was getting her car back anytime soon, she was in for a long wait. The next day, I found exactly what I expected in my mailbox, an official HOA notice. Emergency meeting scheduled for this evening. Attendance strongly encouraged. Translation? Karen had run straight to the board, probably spinning some sob story about how I was a menace to the neighborhood. Fine by me. I had receipts. Before heading to the meeting, I printed out everything. Security footage of her breaking into my garage, screenshots of her texts, and every complaint she'd ever filed against me for nonsense like my lawn being too tall or my trash cans being out too long. To top it off, I brought a lawyer friend, just to make sure Karen or the HOA didn't try anything shady. As soon as the meeting started, Karen took control of the floor. "Neighbors, we have a problem," she announced, pacing dramatically. "Certain residents are refusing to cooperate with the community. They are disregarding the HOA's authority and making life difficult for everyone." I crossed my arms, waiting. I wasn't the only one either. A few other homeowners exchanged glances. One guy in the back actually scoffed. Karen continued, her voice dripping with fake concern. We all know how important it is to follow the rules. But when one person refuses to respect those rules, it creates chaos. And unfortunately, some people, she shot a pointed look at me, think they're above them. I let her finish. Then, when the floor opened for discussion, I stood up, completely calm. Interesting speech, Karen, I said. Now, let's go over some actual facts. I laid out everything. The footage of her sneaking into my garage, the text where she admitted using my space without permission, the ridiculous complaints she'd filed against multiple neighbors, all under the excuse of, "It's just the rules, honey." The room went quiet. Then, one by one, my neighbors started speaking up. "She's been targeting all of us," one woman said. "Yeah, I got a fine for my kids' bikes being in the driveway for 10 minutes, someone else added. "She reported me for unauthorized Halloween decorations last year," another neighbor chimed in. "It was a single pumpkin." The tide had turned. The HOA board members, who had been sitting stiffly at the front, now looked uncomfortable. Finally, the president cleared his throat. "This is troubling," he admitted. "Karen, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Karen, who had been fuming in her seat, suddenly seemed very interested in her paperwork. She mumbled something about only doing her job and keeping standards high, but it was obvious to everyone. Her reign was over. The meeting ended with the board stripping Karen of any real authority. No more fines, no more nonsense complaints, and certainly no more parking in my garage. As we all walked out, one neighbor patted me on the back. "About time someone put her in her place," I just smiled. "Yeah, about time." The next morning, I stepped outside, only to stop dead in my tracks. Karen had parked her car directly in front of my garage, completely blocking me in. I sighed, took a few pictures for proof, and shook my head. This was pure retaliation. After getting humiliated at the HOA meeting, she must have decided that if she couldn't control the neighborhood through rules, she'd do it through pettiness. Fine. Two could play that game, except I wasn't going to stoop to her level. I called the non-emergency police line. About 20 minutes later, an officer arrived. By then, Karen had already peeked through her blinds and come outside, acting like she just happened to be checking her mail. "Good morning, officer," she said with an exaggerated smile, pretending not to notice me standing right there. The officer got straight to the point. "Is this your car, ma'am?" Karen blinked innocently. "Oh, yes, I must have parked a little too close. Just a simple misunderstanding." The officer turned to me. "You're unable to get out of your garage?" I nodded. "Yep. And I already have pictures, just in case she tries to deny it later." Karen's smile faltered. "Now, hold on. I was just—" The officer cut her off. "Ma'am, you can't block someone's driveway. It's illegal." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She looked at the officer, then at me, as if waiting for someone to back her up. No one did. After a long pause, she huffed and stomped toward her car. "Fine. I'll move it. No need to overreact." As she reversed out of the way, I turned back to the officer. "I just want this documented in case it happens again, and if it does, I'd like to know the process for filing a harassment report." Karen froze in her driver's seat. The officer nodded. "Absolutely. If this continues, you can file a formal complaint, but hopefully we won't need to take it that far." Karen didn't say another word. She just sped off down the street, probably fuming. That was the moment she finally realized. Her little power trip was over. In the weeks that followed, something strange happened. Karen went quiet. No more emails about grass height, no more unwanted visits, No more complaints about my trash cans. It was as if she had finally realized she wasn't in charge anymore. Then, one afternoon, I saw it. A for sale sign planted right in her front yard. I wasn't surprised. After everything that had happened, she probably couldn't stand living in a neighborhood where people no longer feared her. Without her influence in the HOA, she was just another homeowner, and that clearly wasn't enough for her. Over the next few weeks, I watched as moving trucks came and went. Little by little, Karen's reign over the neighborhood disappeared, one piece of furniture at a time. Then came moving day. I happened to be outside when she stepped onto her porch for the last time. She spotted me from across the street. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then, she gave me a small nod. Not an apology, not a goodbye. Just a nod. Maybe it was her way of admitting defeat, or maybe it was the closest thing to respect she could manage. Either way, I returned the gesture with a small wave, and just like that, she was gone. The neighborhood felt different after that, lighter, freer. People started talking more, spending time outside without fear of being nitpicked. It was amazing how much one person's bad energy could affect an entire place. Looking back, I realized something important. People like Karen only have power if you let them. They thrive on control, but the moment you stand your ground, they start to crumble. And that was the most satisfying part of all.